Hi, I'm Hunter, and I first want to thank the organizers and the Creative Writing Studies organization for allowing me here today. Let's begin with a story. I'm about 17. My mother, brother, and I are in Yankee Candle. My mother has coupons to use before they expire. And my brother and I are left to our own devices. When my brother gets too close to the front door, too far away from me, I shout, "Hey," to call him back. One cashier looks up at me, a customer turns to face me, but I'm only ever looking to my brother. He waves to me, and I go, begrudgingly, to where he is. This is the moment that we're going to dissect. I call my brother with "Hey" in the middle of Yankee Candle, knowing anyone and everyone else in there can and most likely will respond. He responds with a gesture and I go to him. I know I am in a room full of people when I shout, but I only want or need my brother to respond. This will be key later. When I first started writing, I was about 12 and started with fan fictions in response to the default that I was noticing: white. So I wrote black characters. I wrote stories about having natural hair and received praise for finally recognizing people like me in fan fiction. Through my ventures in fan fiction, I wondered if this idea about audience wanting to respond and engage directly with specific people existed out in the larger world. The short of it, yes, I could translate similar ideals of audience from fan fiction to creative writing. The long of it, it is very much not easy to do. Let's first consider, what does it mean to have an audience, or at least to be writing towards a specific group of people. Go back to me calling out "Hey" to my brother in Yankee Candle. This is the hail. This is me addressing him. The process of hailing requires, by default, a response. He, in that moment of hearing my voice, turns and responds by waving me over to him. He is made in that moment. Someone is made in the act of the address, in the act of hailing. A person is brought into being where all their subjectivities and identities are fully formed in the moment that they are addressed. Even if we don't respond, they were just recognized as a being. In me shouting to my brother, he is fully recognized as a boy, as a black boy, as the child to my parents, the youngest after my sister and me. I am bringing every piece of his existence to the foreground just by simply calling out "Hey." Let's take this a step further. All of us creatives have a specific audience in mind. We have some version of who we anticipate our audience to be. And that's dangerous, to know that you want to specifically talk to someone, but as writers, we are shouting into a room full of people who can be and sometimes are very much outside our anticipated or imagined audience. I'm here to say, shout into a room full of people anyway. So what if someone gets it wrong? We've all had the awkward moment when we're walking down the sidewalk and wave at someone we thought we saw or had someone wave at us, only to realize that they were talking to someone else. And we survived. Maybe. We're gathered here to talk about writing as care. And I want to tell you right now, caring as a writer means writing whatever story burns inside of you. I mean this specifically for writers of color inside the literary worlds not built for them. I say to write it anyway because someone else needs to hear that call, that hail. Someone else has a similar enough story to yours that needs to know they are not alone. Care for yourself by telling your story. We've all been wrong before, so say it anyway. Write it anyway. Now, I've been placed into the pedagogical lens of this conference, and I've just encouraged you to all write your stories as a rebellious act of care. But in an academic setting, it's worth noting that our stories and poems as writers of color will be intercepted and read by people beyond our imagined audience. In my first creative writing workshop, as a graduate student, I submitted a poem about my family's reaction to queer family members. I mentioned things like dreads and baggy clothes to paint the image of studs that were in my family. Or for folks who may not be familiar, Black lesbians who present themselves in a more masculine fashion. Let me tell you, I thought I was nailing it. But I had a classmate who in their written feedback specifically called into question the link between dress and sexuality. They at first thought it might have been gang related, and then they weren't sure how hair and sexuality were related at all. Someone who did not get my call right. They heard it, they answered it, but they got it wrong. I had two options: change it to fit their expectations, or say to myself as the author, I know the specific people who will hear this, and I want to address them. I almost did change the poem to fit and temper expectations. I almost took the whole half of the stanza out. But I didn't, because I knew that classmate wasn't the person I needed to answer my hail. We've all heard that to be a good writer, you must be a good reader, right? But I think given my experience and others much like me, being a good reader has still produced some problems inside the workshop. So I think the phrase should be, good writers are mindful readers. Ronald Bart, who I'm sure we all know and love, or don't love, wrote the essay Death of the Author. In this essay, Bart proposes that placing any sort of authorial presence on a text kills a reader, preventing them from a fruitful conclusion of their own understanding about a text, because readers will only place meaning inside what the author has already established. An interesting caveat in his essay is that readers come to a text empty, ready to have words poured into them. By default, this assumes that a reader can put aside their worldly views and beliefs and aesthetics, but that is not the case. No reader comes to a text as a blank slate, as seen by my experiences inside the workshop. And if we take the blank reader a step further, there is an implication that there is a blank author. But no one in this creative writing process is a blank canvas. When I write, part of who I am bleeds into the work. In his book, Craft in the Real World, Matthew Salis argues to this same point. No author of color comes to their work blank. Our ethnicities and culture contexts have and can seep onto the page. Therefore, in workshop, when our work is being commented on, our ethnicities, by extension, go up onto the chopping block with the work as well. In essence, there is a thin line which is and can be collapsed between author and art for writers of color. And white writers and readers in the workshop must be mindful of that fact. How do we handle that? I've spent so much time talking about the collapse of author and art and the importance of caring for oneself by telling their stories anyway. But what next? And let me be clear, I am specifically talking to the white instructors, professors, and workshop leaders. I am specifically asking you, how do you handle a workshop with a writer of color? How do you handle subjectivities and identities in the workshop and on the page? You teach your students and writers to be mindful readers. You teach students how to hone the skill of workshop and hone the skill of discussion. And you do it at the undergraduate level. In one of my graduate level literature classes, I had a professor respond to almost every comment in our discussion with one question. Let's say the author has a reason for that. Now, how does that change the way we see this work? And I mean, she asked it all the time. But teaching creative writing means balancing the agency of the reader, giving them the right to respond and engage in a work that makes sense to them, with the same kind of agency for the author as the person who crafted this work. In my own undergraduate creative writing class that I'm teaching this semester, I taught my students about rhetoric and the parts of the rhetorical situation. Those parts are author, audience, subject matter, exigence, and purpose. I personally focus heavily on audience and purpose in my class, and they have to hate me by now when I ask, who do we think the author might be trying to talk to in this piece? Who do we think the audience is? What do we think the purpose is? And how does that purpose influence the choices the author made? I ask these questions every single time because I want to build mindful readers before we start workshops. I don't offer this as a perfect how to build mindful readers guide. My semester is not over, and this is my first time teaching creative writing compared to my year of teaching English composition. But all of this is to say that there's still much scholarship for me to read and to explore, and there's more to this paper that needs to be unearthed. But I want to start here. When we teach writers, we must teach them agency as authors to trust themselves, while simultaneously teaching them how to read carefully and mindfully. We must work with students to teach them how to pose their questions and reactions as food for thought rather than demands. Language is the tool we've all told ourselves we're going to use. And so, let's learn how to use it for care, for mindfulness, for creation. Thank you.